So welcome all. Hopefully you guys are all in the right Zoom room. This is the Computational Thinking and Learning Initiative's first panel, first speaking of the speaker series. And I guess we can get started. And then people will roll in as we get the introduction started. So my name is Noel Entity. I have my Christmas tie on today for everyone's amusement. So welcome. And CTLI is a transdisciplinary initiative here at Vanderbilt. We're in our second year of planning and just getting started. And this is our first speaker series, or first session in our speaker series. We're a combination of computer science, education, humanities, natural sciences, with coming together with the belief that computational thinking offers opportunity for two-way transformation of the disciplines, for computer science and computational thinking to change the way the practices and research and of the disciplines themselves, like the humanities, but also that the practices and the goals of other disciplines will in turn transform computer science and develop a different sensibility there. I think, I don't know if I speak for all of us, but I see, and I think we also see computational thinking as a new form of literacy, one that has broad implications for how many different disciplines will engage the world. And that's the sort of thinking that starts us with thinking about this panel. So if computational thinking is a literacy, it's been argued that literacy is a civil right. And so that we wanted our first panel, our first opening to think through issues of equity and in terms of computational thinking. Before I introduce the speakers, really quickly, each presenter is going to do about 10 minutes. If you have questions for the individual presenters, okay. I have not yet figured out how to read the chat and speak at the same time, so forgive me. Each presenter is going to take about 10 minutes, and then if you have questions for individual presenters, we're going to ask you to put them in chat or wait till all three presenters are finished. After the three presenters go, Corey's going to start, Corey Brady, who is one of the co-directors of the Computational Thinking and Learning Initiative, will ask some integrative questions, and then it will be a free-for-all, and we will just let people ask their questions as they want to. And if you type them into chat, Lynn will try and elevate them to the speakers on your behalf. So feel free to use chat to promote your questions if you have a hard time getting the floor. And Corey will then moderate the discussions. And then I think after that, we'll just have a free-ranging discussion based on the excellent panelists we put together for you. Let me introduce those panelists. They're fantastic. We're super excited to have three really world-renowned scholars and all have a history of thinking about this topic. We'll start with Dr. Yasmin Kafai of the University of Pennsylvania. She is the Laurie and Michael Milken Distinguished Professor there. And I have known her since I was just a young pup. She has been worked on Scratch and Yville and makerspaces and e-textiles. And she's always had an eye towards gender equity. In fact, she was the author of the report in 2006, something like that, Under the Microscope, Gender Equity in the Sciences. And she's written a great book series of connected play, connected code, and connected gaming. So she's going to start us off. And we didn't give a lot of direction. We're leaving it up to the presenters in terms of how they want to interpret equity in computational thinking. So I'm excited to hear what they have to say. Our second speaker will be Dr. Nicole Pinkard. She's an associate professor at Northwestern University. She's the founder of the Digital Youth Network, which has collaborated with the mayor of Chicago and other city agencies to create the infrastructure for digital media and computation across the Chicago area. I will say, I first met Nicole when she was generous enough when I was first teaching in educational technology. She loaned me or gave me a copy of her software that she developed called Seseo Playmate, which was, as I know it, the first sort of culturally relevant sort of software that I could come across. But I had installed it wrong. She doesn't know this story. And so I'm haunted to this day because the voice of all these little girls singing Miss Mary Mac and things was replaced by this demonic robot voice. And so I just, every time I hear Miss Mary Mac now, I just think of this like robotic voice in the back of my head. I don't know what I did wrong, but I installed it wrong. So I'm super excited to hear more about what she's going to say.
I just changed my background because of what she said. So, oh, let me put that one up. Yeah. Me 30 years ago.
And then our last speaker will be Dr. Robbie Melton. She's a professor at Tennessee State University, where she is the Associate Vice President for the National Smart Technology Innovation Center. And her program of research has always focused, as I understand it, around digital equity in multiple forms. She works with mobile apps, with distance learning, with the Internet of Everything. And for me, the one that I'm most excited to hear about, and maybe I will hear about it today, is equity in the realm of mixed reality, augmented reality, and virtual reality, which is an area of technology which I haven't seen a lot of equity work go on. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Yasmin. Everybody clap.
Muted. Well, thank you, Noel, Corey, and then everybody for the invitation. I'm excited to present and discuss this topic with co-presenters and the audience. And let me, can you see the slides? Okay, thumbs up, wonderful. So yes, you gave us a lot of latitude. So I thought I start out by focusing on how we can diversify computational thinking for K-12 education. And I put this in because that is my playground on the context in which I think about computational thinking. And as all of you know, when Jeanette Wing in 2006 wrote that little opinion viewpoint piece for ACM communication, computational thinking was not a term she coined, but she resurfaced essentially in a time in which computer science was a little bit in a crisis, which is hard to believe today. But she was trying to point out what the contributions of computer scientists are. And so this term of computational thinking as involving solving problems, designing systems, and understanding human behavior by drawing on the fundamental concepts of computer science was the original definition which she proposed. In the meantime, I mean, there have been some extensions, but I think the gist is still there. And it is, you know, there are a lot of viewpoint pieces. It is really interesting on how this particular concept really took hold. I would say that computational thinking is really now discussed around the globe and has kind of become the idea around which all K-12 computer science initiatives inside and outside of schools coalesce. I mean, there are tons of books, reports, workbooks across all grade levels. It's rare to see such a recognition. But what also has happened in the last few years as this term has become more popular is that different framings and different perspectives have kind of become more popular. And I want to take part of my talk to kind of highlight that there are actually different ways we think about computational thinking and what kind of ramifications does this have for diversity. This is something I worked on with Chris Proctor, who is now at SUNY Buffalo, and Deborah Lee. And we presented last year when we were still traveling at the ISA conference. And we, after a lot of discussions, kind of decided to think about three different ways which we observed in standards, in research, across all those contexts: cognitive, situated, and critical. And I think it's important when we think about diversity that we are kind of clear on what we actually mean, what computational thinking is promoting. So if we think about the first one, in which I would say the cognitive framings of computational thinking are by far the most popular ones. And when you see proponents of this particular framing, they really focus on competency and skill building and programming and problem solving. Very often you find a strong emphasis on university and future careers, kind of the two C's of college and career readiness. And obviously, they draw very heavily from cognitive learning theories, which focus on internal mental models and individual works. And there are many examples. One of them is actually the Code.org Computer Science Discovery series, which has been, there's both a middle school as well as a high school version, which kind of push this idea of computational thinking, that you learn about computational concepts, about key ideas. And that, I think, would say most of the time when people talk about computational thinking, that's what they think about. But there's also what we called situated framings of computational thinking. And those really value personal expression and social connection through computation creation. And there's also furthermore an emphasis that those computational artifacts are shareable and situated in real world context. And those particular framings draw from a different body of learning research coming from the constructionist and connected learning theory, which promote hands-on, interest-driven, and peer-supported activities. And I could, very selfishly put in one of the curriculum units we actually developed for exploring computer science, Stitching the Loop, where students design interactive wearable artifacts which are very personalized and where they, in this context, learn about computation and engineering. But there are other examples: Karen Brennan's Creative Computing Guide, many other activities which kind of have adopted this framing of computational thinking. And then more recently, there also has been an emphasis on what we would call critical framing of computational thinking. And here, there's really a primacy on developing agency and voice in using computation, and that young designers deal with political, ethical, and moral challenges in the world. And this work obviously draws from critical pedagogy, which often promotes examination and resistance to existing power structures through reflection and engagement. And I put here as one example, again, the work by Lee and Soap on students developing gentrification apps to kind of examine the infrastructure. So you can see here that students, who are engaged in more critical framing, not just focus on computation, but have a clear purpose in mind. So a lot of these framings, some of them, the boundaries, I think, are fairly fluid. But I think what is really interesting when you look across hundreds of publications now, which focus on computational thinking, there is a heavy emphasis on designing applications. So no matter which framing, you really want, I mean, learners to kind of create an artifact for the world. But there's some key distinctions. And I think when we come from the cognitive perspective, we often lose out on personal relevance and social concerns while emphasizing concepts and practices. When we move into the situated part, we often do not include cultural relevance while stressing personal connections and interest. And not all, but many of the efforts focused on social justice often give great voice, but don't push a lot of computational concepts and practices. So I think this kind of distinction should really lead us to a broader perspective rather than to see them as really distinct and battling with each other. We came up with this kind of donut model where we kind of highlight that each of those perspectives, framings kind of brings in different elements, and they don't need to be in opposition to each other. They actually can be integrated. They kind of focus on different units of analysis, and we can actually combine cognitive, situated, and critical perspectives and activities, those hitting on all critical points. And I want to give you one example on what is actually happening next week. As you all know, your symposium is really conveniently set up just before Computer Science Education Week will start on December 7th. And this year's actually CS Ed Week, if you see the little logo, has a focus on social justice and CS for good. And one activity which really has become the hallmark of CS Ed Week is the Hour of Code, which started in 2013 and now has morphed into a global movement. I mean, the numbers are quite staggering. I mean, over 1 billion people have been served, 45 languages in 180 countries, and I think they have over 60,000 events. And you can say what you want, I mean, in terms of helping to popularize computer science and by extension, fostering this movement of computational thinking. The Hour of Code is definitely one of the key events. But what is really striking when you kind of scroll through all the activities, I mean, there is, I mean, a focus on kind of, you just have an hour, I mean, on promoting applications, learning certain concepts. And in the past few years, there definitely has been an increase in kind of more personalized applications. But the kind of CS for good, the social justice part really isn't that much present. And you might wonder, maybe that is too much to kind of accomplish. So what we're proposing with a group of colleagues here and students at Penn, we decided to kind of design one of those applications, which we call Code Quilt. So Gayatri, I know, is on the call, Mia Shaw and Luis Navarro, Morales Navarro, and we teamed up with CS for Philly, which is a local organization here, in designing Code Quilt. And what we want to do, we want students to take ownership of their own stories about coding, especially those stories that are often lost and ignored across apps, websites, and other digital media, by designing digital quilt patches. And we're proposing this in the style of the Hour of Code activities. It's been now pushed out to all the Philadelphia public school teachers. They can decide whether they want to join us, and then in Scratch actually design their own quilt patches, put them up in the Scratch studio, and telling their stories on who can and why we code. And I think within 1 hour, we can kind of get students an hour of code, of kind of getting an introduction into some basic concepts, allowing for the personal connections and creativity, but then also bring in this critical angle, which has been really been missing from the overly kind of promotional aspect of Hour of Code. And what you see in the upper left corner is an example actually of a real textile patch quilt. This is work which Mia Shaw has done at the Franklin Institute, where students build, these patches with electronic textiles. And Noel mentioned this is one of my areas where I work with a lot of high schools, where they those not only learn engineering and computer science concepts, but can also customize and personalize their packs, as well as be critical about who is engaged and why. So I think when we, to conclude, when we think about computational thinking and diversity, we want to frame beyond concepts and practices to include an understanding of the values, biases, and histories which are embedded in digital technologies. And this will kind of leave us to computational thinking as literacies, because we always, when we think about literacies, we have a functional aspect which we want students to understand. But then we also see literacies as part of a political understanding. So understanding code to understand how the systems kids are using today at work. And there is an important personal level, so that students not just are able to express themselves, but also communicate and interact and build relationships with others. And that is my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yasmin. And as promised, we're going to move right through the speakers to Nicole, and then we will do questions afterwards. You have to unmute Nicole. Hold on, I will unmute her if I can.
Yasmin, are you going to allow us to, I want to use Code Quilt ASAP, please.
We'll send you the info.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited for this conversation, and I hope that what I'm going to share is going to follow along a little bit with what Yasmin was saying. Can everyone still see the bigger screen? Okay. So the way that I'm approaching this question and is more to think about how do we get beyond the one experience of being introduced to computational thinking from an equity standpoint, and making sure that we're thinking holistically about the combination and the spaces where kids can engage in computational thinking activities, such that it's less of a medicine, which I think oftentimes is what happens for kids of color. It's a dose that you got to get in this one particular space, as opposed to something that they can stumble upon and engage throughout multiple different spaces of their experience. So I'm gonna sort of share a little bit about how some of the work we're thinking about it now. And so for me, that hyper focuses on the out of school space, because I've always, ever since I first saw this representation, it's always like, yes, schools matter, and out of school spaces matter too, particularly if we're trying to embed, I think of computational thinking as a literacy. And as a literacy, you have to be able to use it in other particular spaces. And as an African American, where's the screen? As an African American woman, for me, my parents didn't have a vision, a mission for me to become a computer scientist. I happened to be in an ecosystem. High school had my basketball coach was the CS teacher in 8th grade, and I love basketball. So my goal was to play basketball, to become the starter. So let me take his class, right? So a lot of different things were in the ecosystem for me that made developing the computational skills and plausible. And so one of the challenges I have with even I will say with the approach to month of code is that I think it's sort of, in order to make it such that everyone can do it, you're stripping away, it becomes, you're not doing scratch, you're doing puzzles, 20 steps. And I think the power for me was I was able to use CS and learn computational thinking in ways that were meaningful to me. And so the challenge that what I'm gonna talk about now is how we can do both of those. So over the time, my work has moved from the small scale, the say-say-oh playmate, we Noel said, that's me long time ago, to now thinking much more about systems. So how can we work at the city level and enable cities to think about creating computational systems? And where that came from is fortunate doing some work with Bridget Barron, Caitlin Martin, where we were able to follow, and this was at the beginning of connected learning. So this is a representation of connected learning, but it was before the term connected learning started. We were doing this work alongside it, where we were able to work with a group of kids at a University of Chicago charter school and intentionally try to develop their computational literacies in school and out of school. They all had one-to-one devices and sort of follow the trajectory of where those skills led them. And in doing that work, what we quickly realized that programs, the tools they used were important, but it was really about the people and the places that they became in partnership with. So if you look up at top, what you'll see is all these different people who were in their lives. And those touch points became places to talk about and to build technologies together as part of a conversation, or to use digital media as part of a conversation. But quickly, of course, when they left us, all of these spaces and all these people, when they dispersed to, across 50 different schools in Chicago, they no longer had the critical capacity to engage in those things. So for us, then, of course, thinking about how do you do this at a city level, and how do you not just think about the one experience, but how can you begin to layer together a set of experiences? And this is where you could think about the connected learning literature, making clear, like, let's be intentional about the home, the school, and places like that. But really what that means is you can have this infrastructure and you could document it, but at the end of the day, if the activities aren't done in a way that I see engaging in computational thinking and making as core to my lifestyle and core to my identity, then I'm not going to develop it. And so I think where we need to begin to go as a community is saying, I think we have the tools, but I think we haven't necessarily really figured out, you can think about culturally responsive, which is more thinking about culturally responsive from the standpoint of the systems, but I think we also need to think about the spaces and places and how to make sure that they're as culturally responsive and welcoming if we want kids to step into these spaces enough time to engage. And so that took us to the work in Chicago, where we said, well, let's step back and let's look at, do our kids have the same, as a basketball fanatic, is it as easy for me to play basketball in South Shore as it is for me to learn to make and learn to code? Right. And so we asked, in asking that question, we looked across looking for equity in providers, who's teaching STEAM providers in locations, the variety of programs, and then begin to look at, well, what about sports and wellness as a community? Most communities have decided everyone needs a park. So most communities have equity in sports and wellness. We're beginning to do that in career for high school students. But when you say coding and games, and you say, we could say we want it, but we don't have the spaces and places that are equitable to allow for that. So from that work, but the reality, and this is what we have to own, and I think this moment has brought us to, the reason that is because most of our spaces and places, our schools, our museums, our parks were built, most of them aren't new. And they were built in a time of redlining, where it's not just redlining, it's greenlining, right? So this is me looking at Evanston, where I live, and we're having a lot of challenges of getting kids to engage in programming, but in reality, the spaces and places for them to engage aren't in their communities. And that's because if we go backwards, when all those schools were placed, and when all of those parks were placed, they were placed in the 60s and the 70s, where I say it from the perspective Black Lives Matter least. So when you were placing a school, you weren't placing it to be comfortable and accessible to the African-American community. So we're then using these spaces to be where we want our kids to come and learn and engage, and the effort to get to them isn't equitable. We have to also begin to think about rethinking about where we place our programming, how we allocate and create new spaces. So then That then led us to deep dive into a community and say, okay, well, let's really understand where are the spaces that are possible and can we think differently about doing this? So in one community, we were able to say, well, here's all the spaces for learning that are possible. If we think about schools, libraries, social service agencies, kids, religious centers, parks. But then when we look at, because of our work with the city, we're able to look at which of those spaces are actually doing summer learning programs. We see that is not majority of them. We then decided to say, and then you can go look at it and say, well, what types of spaces? Who has maker spaces? Who has different types of other spaces? And finally, we were able to look at the programming and say, well, we don't actually have, it came down to us as we didn't have the spaces or the mentors to do the programming that places wanted. So to sort of get through this quickly, led us to a conversation with all our community members where they were able to say, we said to them, if we provide a set of resources, if we can provide mentors, people who are trained, how can you help us think about where we place them and how we design the programming so that this can be effective? That led us to create something we conceptualized it before the pandemic as a play space, but then it got implemented during the pandemic. And actually, in some sense, I think it ended up being a much better program, where we really worked with the community members to go out and find the organizations, both the ones Northwestern, our STEM expertise with local community organizations, to come up with 12 computational STEAM-based programs over the summer to train over 46, 50. We started out with 60 community college and first and second year college students to then be those STEAM mentors. So in that sense, we're trying to make sure we can have quality programming, mentors who look like the young people, and then place the programming equitably across the city. So our way of thinking about this and what adding into the conversation is that I think we sort of have a way of understanding the types of experiences, but we as a field haven't done enough to link those experiences together and to make them accessible in spaces that are comfortable to young people and also led by individuals who look like them. So STEAM ambassadors, we successfully did this, and now it's something that we're replicating and trying to figure out how to replicate it more across the city. That's the video link, which is a video link that can explain what the program is. Quiet, I'm finished.
Thank you, Nicole. And I'm starting to get a lot of questions built up for myself, so hopefully the audience is as well. And our final speaker before we get to discussion will be Dr. Robbie Melton.
Hello, everyone. You should see a movable background and you should be staring at me at this point. Again, I come from a different perspective in terms of empowering underserved population and embracing STEM. Many of us, when we hear coding, we pull back, or we hear STEM and we go, I don't know if I can do that. But if I can just grab you, and if you could just go, what is she wearing? Ladies and gentlemen, everything that I have on, from my glasses, yes, they are the old Google glasses, as where my jewelry and my clothing are all coded. That takes our students to a point of what? What do you mean? Where I can take off my earring as a Raspberry Pi and connect it to a Bluetooth monitor, keyboard, and compute. In other words, we know that there's a low percentage of minorities in the STEM area. We have tons of research to say why. I'm beyond the why. I'm going to get you. So when I go out knowing that diversity across all races, gender, must embrace this new world that we're in right now. So I don't look like your normal geek. When you think of, wow, she's really into technology. Look, I'm old, and here's your myth, Black, female. Oh, come on now. but I bet you everybody in this audience, I can out app you. And boy, do I got some technology that will blow your mind. So
Yes.
start off with you all by saying, check out my fingernails. My fingernails are coated. I have coated fingernails. I bet you I have the smartest fingernails in this Zoom. And to let you know, not only are they smart, I have on smart nail polish. Look at your nail polish. I bet you your nail polish cannot detect date, rape, drugs. You see, we have to present a new view of coding, creating, and STEM to all of our students. So I just have a little PowerPoint and I got some technology. And on behalf, where's Nicole? I'm looking for. Okay, you know I got this coded basketball. You know I went and got this coded
Yeah.
basketball.
I got one too. Yep, love it.
Okay, and it's so smart, everyone. It knows that I shouldn't play basketball. So with, I am here to give you all just a little taste of technology and computational. And I'm going to go right in and share this screen. And yes, I'm going to make mistakes because in coding, we debug and we learn from mistakes. So everybody just hold on. And here we go with the presentation. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, what do? We debug. So with that, I'm Robbie Melton, and you will always remember me as that coded lady. You won't remember the name, but you'll remember that lady was coded down. And with that, I represent the Internet of everything, meaning we're all connected. Once you hit that internet, we're all connected, even with my refrigerator. So with that, we know that technology has changed the way we teach, work, and learn. And yes, my nails can operate equipment as well as my smart nail polish.
Well, when we choose our nail polish, I'm talking about women here, color is usually the most important factor. You know, is it going to match what I'm wearing? But now a group of young inventors say their nail polish could keep you from becoming a victim of date rape.
So with that, we want every student, faculty, staff, community to have the same opportunity to create something that can change this world. So we also know when we deep dive into the data regarding diversity, underserved populations, we know that more minorities switch to another major when they do enroll in STEM. So not only do we have the problem of recruiting, but when we get them in, they switch. So with that, we also know that only, this isn't only everyone, 40% of our schools even offer coding. Where when you look at other countries, they start at the preschool level. Yes, I have coding here for preschool, toddlers. So if we don't start young, you know we're going to have a problem when they get to high school and college. Here's what I want to push out to you all. Not everyone is included in the opportunity. In terms of females, only 23%. Compared to only a couple of years ago, we had more females. We're declining. And only 19% of students who receive a STEM degree, women. Now let's talk big time here. And this is why I am so passionate and dedicated, because only 2% are women of color. So ladies and gentlemen, when they called and asked, Robbie Melton, do you want to be on the panel? You know I had both hands up. Yes, I do. Because 2% in the year 2020, oh, we must do something about it. And again, minority STEM graduates are less likely to even use their career. Now, we all have to take a breath. That means we're having a problem recruiting. Then when they get into the program, they drop out. And then when they graduate, they less likely to use the degree. Something is wrong. And that's why we are all here today. So I'm not one to just keep going over numbers and what's going on and in terms of diversity in the workforce. I'm here to share with you on behalf of Tennessee State University and our SMART Center. We're taking this seriously and we're coming in a different way and different methods. I'm here to share with you in terms of computational thinking. It's all about that thought process, not just about devices or computer science. It's how you think. And I start you all with, what if? If we can start our students with just those two words, what if? We have started them down the road of computational thinking. And with that, you're talking new jobs, jobs that only, look, I haven't even heard of these jobs that's coming up. And with all of these new jobs, we're also talking about skills that our new employers must have. So with all of that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm excited. I know we have a job to do. And on behalf of the SMART Center, we are promoting gamification, mixed reality, and esports. And with all of those, not only are we looking at problem solving, here's your new concept today. It is problem poser. That's a whole new twist. We know there's going to be problems that we have to solve, but why can't we pose those problems? And that's a new concept in terms of smart education. We are here to bring in mixed reality, and I'm going to just take a few minutes of just giving you a taste of what this is all about.
Look around. Technology is all around us. We use it in every aspect of our lives. It enables us to do amazing things. But what if we could go further? What if we could go beyond the screen? Where your digital world is blended with your real world. Now we can. This is the world with holograms. What will they enable us to do? New ways to visualize our work.
I have an idea for the fuel tank.
New ways to share ideas with each other.
How are things going your end?
I just put the images in OneDrive.
Perfect.
More immersive ways to play. New ways to teach and learn.
So put the new trap in the place of the old one.
Now what?
And tighten here and here.
New ways to collaborate and explore the places we've never been.
Look at this formation. Let's take a closer look.
And new ways to create the things we imagine. Because when you change the way you see the world, you can change the world you see. This is Microsoft HoloLens.
And with that, as I conclude, on behalf of Tennessee State University Smart Innovation Center. We are not just playing games, we're creating games. So whether it is esports, gamification, we know that there are issues, challenges, problems. But on behalf of Tennessee State being the hub for Apple, everyone can code and create. We are able to bring not only to Tennessee, but the entire nation, online or even on ground, how you are able to create, code, as well as we help to design apps and to empower our students, our faculty, and you with all of the coding. So again, if Denise Malloy is in the audience, if she would put in the chat a free app called Virtual T, and it's free, whether you are an Android or an Apple. And then when we get through with the presentation, I will stand up, I will open my chest. No, it's not Superman, it's Coded Robbie, and you'll be able to scan my shirt and see my heart and lungs. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Without any planning at all, there was an amazing amount of interconnections between those three talks. But I will turn it over to Corey to get the ball rolling on our discussion with a few integrative questions, and then it'll just be a free-for-all. I think we have some really interesting things to talk about. So thank you all to all of our presenters.
Yes. So thank you, Noel. And yes, thank you all three. I think it is really remarkable to see three such fresh, empowering and expressive visions of integration of ideas that we're all struggling with to make sense of. I'm sort of seeing in the image of the coded lady a kind of extensive and connected history in the HBCUC squared work, as well as and in TSU's Smart Innovation Center. So so in just one image, you see a lot of unpacking that we would love to do. Similarly, in DYN, there is a kind of really considered reflection on all facets of youth's lives and what support looks like. And then I think in Yasmin's career in the textile work, but also in all the connected collaborations, there's also this kind of extensive ramification of thoughtful connections made across fields that most people focus on in a kind of siloed way. But I think that there are three very different visions. They're compatible, complementary, but good to put in conversation. And I wanted maybe to start with, so I feel like we saw maps that looked at lenses from that designers might take on computational thinking, that learners and their communities might take, and that institutions and spaces and places might take actually as kind of participants in an ecology. Around questions of capacity for new things, identity, new identities, and rooted but changing identities. And I think the question at the end of this rant is I'm curious about how each of you thinks about the longitudinal picture. And how if we're thinking on learners, how learners carry rich and creative experiences in each of your programs to future classrooms or future parts of their lives or careers. Similarly for researchers, or similarly for institutions, how what growth looks like in each of those participants in the ecology. And I don't have I think we can,
I think maybe I can start with that. I mean, I think that's the question I'm concerned about, because I know I didn't end up at Stanford in computer science because of one CS course. right? There was the, my aunt had an Apple IIe early, and I spent a lot of time with her. She said, figure it out, right? That led to me being comfortable taking, right? So there's so many things that I think for kids of color, particularly African American kids, there's the intentionality. Things have to be done right. Every thought has to be considered, or the right person has to be in place. Whereas I talk to others, it's you stumble upon it. It's just in the water, it's in the ether. You're engaging in those computational things. So for me, I think that we as a field and collectively, we know how to do the individual experiences, but we haven't thought about the infrastructure that's necessary to create diverse pathways. The infrastructure we've created is a pathway. And right now it's because I want to be a computer scientist. And in the reality, that was never my, that was never my desire. And anybody who knows me still knows that yes, I'm a computer scientist, but I don't see, that was a tool that I needed. It's not necessarily the identity, because the identity of being a computer scientist was never something that I saw that I wanted to take on, right? Because I never saw it represented. So I say that to say that the only way to address that, and it's like what Robbie is doing, it's like it's just in the water. It's part of your lifestyle. It's part of your culture. It's not and that then means it has to be longitudinal. We have to think about the home, the school, and all these other places. And if the school is the only place where we're expecting it to be superhero for kids of color, then we're always going to have a gap, and it's always going to continue to grow. And the final thing, then is from a research standpoint, it's really difficult for us to collaborate, right? Yasmin and I, we think a lot alike, and it'll be easy for our work to collaborate. Melissa and I, we collaborated before, but it's so hard because the grant structures and the cycles make it hard for us to say, hey, how can I take your work and bring it here and make my context a context for your study? Because I know my kids, they need your work. So how can we do all this together, IRB? So I think we need to take a systems approach to work and push our funders, NSF and things like that. Maybe not do the science centers again, but something, the life centers, but something that forces us to not replicate the same thing, but to build. I shouldn't be doing more. Yasmin has done all of the e-fabric stuff. Why would I get a grant and recreate what she did, as opposed to be expected to build upon her stuff? So we also have to think about our work as linking together if we expect for it to have an impact in the lives of kids. Okay, I'm quiet.
Robbie or Yasmin, did you want to
Yes. And
join in? Yeah.
Oh, yes. And when you say, I say empowerment, I want it to be where you don't have to be in a classroom to think outside of the box. I want it to be at any time, anywhere, any place. You can turn around and say, what if? And if you start children with that type of thought, it carries all the way through. So I always encourage, every time I present, just look around you and you go, well, what if I had smart shoes? What would they do? Well, I can tell you what they do. They'll call you up, your therapist, everyone, when you're supposed to work out, and your shoes will snitch on you. Smart shoes, knowing that you haven't walked or worked out. So you see, I add a little element of fun, relaxation, but identity. So, and I'll turn it to Yasmin.
I want to disagree a little bit with Nicole and Robbie. And I mean, Nicole knows that I started out in the informal space too with Scratch, and I think it's an essential part of any ecology. But I also have come to realize that we can't just rely on after school where, and I think Nicole's work is exemplary in showing that even access to after school programs, whether they're in community centers organized by universities, is not equitably, to all. We know that there are great disparities too, and this is probably why in the last 5 to 7 years, I've kind of decided, you know, I have to go also into schools because, you know, kids go every day to school. I mean, this is what brought me from psychology into education. I figured I had a living lab. They show up every day. I don't even have to pay them, you know, and then we can do the work there. And I really think about, I mean, you can have a big discussion about how terrible or fantastic schools are. They are the big leveler. And when Robbie said, you know, programs, other countries which start at kindergarten, yes, because the whole country made a commitment to go there. So I want to emphasize when we think about the access opportunities, that we also include schools. Don't neglect that teachers really are the great disseminators if we also can connect and work with them and support them in this. This is
I think. So I think Yasmin, I think it's a both and so I think the in some sense because it wasn't in schools, we had a lot of out of school spaces, and then let's say in Chicago, because we now have it in school, it's almost like, okay, kids are going to take one class and then they're going to take, you know, the EECS, and now they're going to be able to be, you know, eligible and able to so for me it's both and that's where I think our research has to begin to be connected, because none of us can say let's do the whole pathway, but we all focus on ours. But how can we begin to connect it together? So we go in for funding and say we're intentionally trying to understand this ecosystem, exoskeleton, whichever approach you want to take. But we're gonna piece our work together so we can understand what's the value of school in one place and the value of out of school, or value of home. I mean, also because out of school isn't, you know, oftentimes out of school it's a community based. It doesn't even mean what's taking place in home. So yes, I agree. Completely agree, and do not want to be perceived as saying schools are not are important, but they're one of important notes.
Yeah. If I think one good thing, and this is really hard to say, which comes out of COVID and which has pushed, I mean, learning to online in its most terrible incarnations, but if people begin to realize that, I mean, the value of the space of being together, but they're also now see that there are possibilities to expand the school day beyond the 5 or 6 hours you spend in a building. I mean, my great hope would be that we, rather than to say, oh, the pandemic is over, let's go back to where we were before, that we rather say we really are kind of experimented, learned with a new modality. Can we now figure out how to kind of work in a hybrid mode so that these connections, what Nicole pointed out, the ecology between home, school, community, and online spaces is not so separated, but really kind of comes together.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, there are lots of differences between each of your work, but one common theme seems to be a sense that digital media and creative or expressive arts can be an entry point or can be a focal area. And I wonder whether, sort of if you might reflect a little bit about how you see each other's work in that way, as well as we've had questions about whether there are limitations to that entry point, which might be another way of talking about the out of school, the sort of out of curriculum or out of STEM and in STEAM. If you've run into anything that you'd want to share in terms of both assets and challenges with the approaches you've taken.
Yes, Corey, I want to jump in and just share something that we all have, but sometimes we just ignore it. And it's called a smartphone. You know, yes, I talk about mixed reality, but you can do mixed reality on a smartphone. When you talk about computational thinking, when you talk about computing, STEM, name it, we all have the tools now. Even those in preschools are walking around with a tool that is so powerful that, guess what, everyone? More technology than when we sent Apollo 14 into space. the one thing that Yasmin said, the missing element, teachers. Now, again, if you're going to promote STEM and computational thinking, it has to start with our teachers, whether it's preschool or professors. And again, that's a whole new thought process. You're talking about a whole new curriculum. You're talking about throwing out books. So I just want to just throw that out to the audience, because again, we have the tool, but many of us are playing Candy Crush.
But is Candy Crush helping your computational? I mean, it's some analysis, some really good analysis skills.
There's an hour of code in that.
So the question was about the taking the arts-based approach and the limitations of so I think there needs to be a multitude of ways in. And I think because when I was growing up, the reason to learn computational thinking was to get a job in CS. I think today it's life. Computation is embedded in all aspects of our life, understanding algorithms, even to program my Philips lights, right? If I want a really nice light show, I need to figure out some patterns. So I think we need to reset the why and be okay with people having multiple different endpoints. And it's not all about everyone becoming a computer science, but everyone needs to have the literacy and the choice to be able to dictate and control their ways forward. And I think we also then have data science. My biggest concern is from a computational standpoint is understanding data science and algorithms. Yes. and our ability to understand them and understand our digital actions on what that means. So to me, I think we need to have more pathways. So we started out in the arts, and I think we now need to move much more into the data science and other ways into understanding, even controlling your Internet of Things. I think what Robbie is doing with the Internet of Things, understanding your utility. There's all kinds of civic, I think with data, I think it's probably an easier way in to think about the Internet of Things and issues of data science and things like that, that might make it more approachable to a wider audience of people, and even parents. I think you then also get into ways in which there's conversations you can have in the home. You know, I love Scratch, but you know, sometimes getting parents, like is more like I'm helping you oftentimes in those conversations, as opposed to we're co-creating in the families I've worked with. But I can see something like an Internet of Things. We're trying to understand our utility bill. The child and the parent are engaged in a different type of conversation around constructing there than they are in some other ways in which we're getting kids to create with computation.
No, I think that's, you know, it's really the diversity of materials, approaches, and contexts. And I think what Nicole just said, you know, what still dominates a lot of computer science is the focus on STEM, on robotics and games. And there's nothing wrong with it. I've pushed that for, 20 years as well. And the reason why I became interested in electronic textiles, which kind of what Robbie also illustrated, all these different applications, because it just illustrated to students, hey, computation is everywhere. I mean, you can even put it into your clothing.
Yes.
And the data science part of it is really, that I think we're not just living in a physical public, but also in a digital public. And I think we have been doing a much better job in figuring out on how to engage everybody on how our cities are designed. I mean, in terms of giving people a voice in the process when, development happens. And we haven't done anything of that sort for the digital public. We essentially ceded the territory to the big companies. Except in other places, like in Europe, the government has a stronger hand, but that can also be very complicated. You can't always assume that the government has good intentions depending on who is in power. So I see this focus on computational thinking and diversity is really giving everybody a voice in the digital public, because this is a space we're also living, working, interacting in, and it is a design space. It's like the city's a design space. Those streets didn't just come out of nowhere. In some instances, they were designed top down, and others they emerged. And there needs to be, I think, the discussion which is happening now, what do we need to understand? What kind of literacies do we know so that people can become competent participants? I mean, be able to join the conversation and voice their concerns, their desires, and also what is owed to them. I mean, that to me is really, and whether it goes through STEM, whether it goes through the arts, because it is everywhere, it doesn't really matter. So, but we have to broaden the access point and make these things tangible. And this is where I like what Dr. Melton proposed in terms of all those artifacts which are already around us. I mean, and we don't even know what's behind those shiny kind of interfaces. But they were all designed, every single thing.
Yeah, I think this last round has been very helpful to think about the pervasiveness of technology, not only as a means of access, but as actually as a phenomenon to be understood. The idea that computational thinking is everywhere is actually part of the message, not just a set of opportunities for joining in to the conversation. And I want to ask a question that'll maybe allow some of the participants to chime in. I'm not able, like Noel, to read and talk at the same time, but I see that view of computational thinking as pervasive in life is complementary to its notion as a literacy, and several ideas of literacy have come up. Robbie, you were talking about, I think I would put the what if as a component of a kind of literacy. If you're asking what if you're seeing things as designed, you're seeing yourself as a designer who can participate in those conversations. But I wonder whether some of the chat has focused on potential risks or downsides or dystopian views of technology. And I wonder whether the literacy that you're thinking about involves a kind of protection against vulnerability. Like a really clear view of that is the nail polish that protects against date rape. Is how important is that in your minds in terms of learners' access or experiences with computational thinking, that they become armed against potential attacks or vulnerabilities?
Yes, and Corey, I would love to jump on that because it goes hand in hand. And as you are creating, you have the good and you have the oh my, and you have the bad. I want everyone to just think, I'm in technology. I know I eat, sleep, but someone scammed me out of $1,500. How did that happen? And here I know about cyber and spamming and whatever. You have to understand, as we create, it's who's the creator. Are we creating for the better good, or are we creating to get you? So when we look at technology, whether it's emerging infrastructures or whatever, we have to, at the same time, look at safety, security, protection. I mean, you just can't separate them.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that, of course, agree with that. But also we need to make sure it gets to what Robbie is saying. We have to be the creators of technology. If we're constantly trying to figure out how to tweak technologies that haven't been designed for our experiences, then it's not going to work. So that's the importance of being the creators of it. Also being able to, coming up in the age of Radio Shack, where you can look at a computer and open it up and put it together so you can customize it. And now we're in an age where you take things as is, like, you can't even open it up. If you open up, you avoid it. I think we have to, and think about algorithms in that way, right? It just is, something comes on your desk and this is the price. You don't have a way, and even when so we have to make things more transparent, more visible, so we can engage in a conversation about why it is, and to be able to push back. But that means we have to have the literacies and the chops to be able to break those things apart and make things more modular. But I think what's really something I've been sort of struggling is the wrong word, but I think Robbie, I have a good friend, Robbie, so I called you that, Robbie. But I think what you exhibit and what's so necessary is the futuristic, you know, the futuring, thinking about not, you know, so yes, we have to own the past and address the past, but we need to be empowering our young people to be focusing and building a future where they're leading. You know, it is about them. Think of Black Panther and things like that. So I do think yes, we have to be aware and address and protect ourselves, but with developing the skill sets, but also owning the shaping of the ways in which technologies are going to be used to drive our future. And so the future, I hope that we're having more futuring conversations and centering young people and creating that. And in that, by futuring, creating something, transforming, you're actually addressing and eradicating the past. So more of that and less about let's just study the past, let's focus, let's get to creating a new future.
So I'd love to open it up to the audience to ask their questions. So please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your questions. And there's been a number of great questions in the chat window. So if you were the author or wanted to hear more about one of those questions, please add your voice to it and ask it now.
Hi, you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right, so I'm April Collins. I am a public high school teacher. I teach at MLK in Nashville. And I think for me, I have been trying to engage students in computer science from kindergarten up through high school for several years now. So I've kind of had a lot of experiences with a lot of our underrepresented groups. I tend to work with camps in the summer. And one of the things that I found, and I kind of try to put this in the chat, but me typing is a little sometimes. But one of the things that I found is that a lot of our underrepresented groups tend not to have as much engagement in STEM because a lot of the programs that are out, the opportunities that are there for them in schools don't really directly impact them. A lot of the young ladies that I teach are interested in things like medicine, or they're interested in things where they solve needs, solve problems, and they're not fully aware of how technology is really integrated into that, how the digital literacy plays a role in that. So I kind of, in the chat, kind of alluded to like the nail polish that Dr. Melton had, and how I know several young ladies who in their spare time, they like to do nails, they make money as a side hustle, you know, doing nails, all these things, they go to college parties, and it's like, hey, well, what if you understood how this nail polish worked, this smart nail polish, and you can incorporate it into your business? Then it becomes relevant to you. Now, not only do you have a lucrative business, but now you solve a need. Students who have issues, at least in this COVID environment where we are virtually, a lot of our students in high school are working jobs while they should be in school because their parents are not able to work. So if they knew that by learning, you know, how to use technology different, they could work a little bit smarter and potentially work from home instead of having to leave home. Or if there was some sort of way to engage them based off where they are in their community needs, you would have a lot more engagement. But for someone whose parents are struggling financially, who have to work, who have to do these things, learning how to code a robot is not interesting to them. But learning how to solve a problem, if my mother has cancer and I could do some modeling through some sort of biology program or a medical program, that would be meaningful to me. So it's really about trying to find meaningful ways that connect with the community and serves a purpose for them now to kind of spark their interest to be innovative and to pursue a career or pursue knowledge in technology or computer science and have that computational thinking.
April, this answer is just for you. I'm sorry about everyone else, but April, it's a reason that you logged on. This Saturday, like tomorrow, we're having Every Girl Can Code and Create, and guys are welcome too. We have it in the morning for elementary school students and in the afternoon. No charge, open. And because you mentioned you're with Metro Nashville Public School, I am so pleased to share with you, we have a partnership with Metro and Apple, where we are able to present from preschool all the way up. Everyone can code and create. We also have dual enrollment, where your students right now can earn college credit and a pathway, and we offer scholarships and internship. So everyone, I know you have questions, but I have to say to April, thank you, because now you can call up your students and we're going to send you the flyer. But when you are ready, we're going to come to your classroom, whether on ground or virtually.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Keep those questions coming. Oh,
okay.
There we go.
I can go ahead and ask my question. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. All three panelists were amazing. You've definitely got us all thinking. We kind of touched upon this briefly about like teacher education, and we kind of wholeheartedly believe that like we need to be working with the teachers to be able to make any of this a reality, especially like if we are talking about getting this out there for K through 12 classrooms. But at the same time, we all of us like what are envisioning like a CS that is not status quo. That's not what is being like envisioned as in undergrad education that we are very familiar with in CS. So if we are expecting like the teachers to be doing like a very different kind of a CS, which actually puts equity first and really motivates like the minoritized to be a part of this revolution, how do you see that vision changing or shaping teacher preparation to make this really happen?
Well, I can say one of the ways that we're trying to think about it is one is to think creatively about how to grow the teacher pipeline. And so our STEAM Ambassadors initiative works with 18 to 24-year-olds who are in community colleges or four-year institutions to have them be STEAM mentors and educators. So in essence, they're learning how to teach. So the challenge we have, many of us as faculty members, we create content and modules, and we only use them in our study context. But there's no reason we can't make that stuff available and support with our partners. So we then train STEAM ambassadors to do that, but intentionally, we're then trying to work with them to help them think about their role in STEAM education, both from the standpoint that they want to go forward with their academic career, but also then to think about being a teacher. And what we're beginning to see is, and this is only, I'd say I've been doing this enough to have enough mentors who have chosen to keep going. And what we're seeing is many of them talk about that 18 to 24-year-old period of time, if they stay connected to being a mentor, and if they have good positive experiences seeking to want to go into schools of education, right? Because oftentimes, and so that's been a pathway through. So I'm speaking at it from the standpoint, can we grow who wants to go into teaching, intentionally wanting to do STEAM? And I think there's some creative ways to do that, not from the standpoint of teachers who have already focused on that, might be Yasmin or Dr. Melton's.
I mean, we just started working with the nationwide exploring computer science community. This is probably the largest community of experienced thousands of CS teachers, and who for the most part all work in under-resourced schools. I mean, and there's actually very little out there. We're so focused on bringing people into CS, I mean, that we've kind of forgotten about what happens 3-4 years down the line when you kind of want to develop new areas. So we're just starting out, you know, in the middle of COVID. I mean, I think teachers have the hardest job in kind of surviving every day, making sense of what's happening, adjusting to the ever-changing situation. But you will be surprised to hear we have ECS teachers in Mississippi who volunteer for, I mean, we actually pay them for professional development. I mean, so I think there really is a need for us to also think about how we can support the teachers who are already there and moving them into kind of exploring these new directions also, which Dr. Melton pointed out. So moving into data science and all those topics which are of relevance. It doesn't mean, and I agree with Nicole here, not everybody needs to become a computer scientist. I mean, this is really not the goal when we talk about illiteracy. But I think we need to provide opportunities in schools and with teachers to create at least a stepping stone. And then I want to kind of hark back. I hope what we learned from COVID, that we build better connections to communities, to school. I mean, that not all of this, what's kind of happening now with online learning, and I know it's complicated, it's not working, I mean, to its best capacities. I mean, we all know there are better ways of doing this, that we can leverage it this way.
And I just want to just jump in by saying, again, I come from the generation of black and white TV. So just to see you all and to be able to communicate, it's a miracle. Trust me, it is indeed a miracle. So with that, teacher training, I mean, is the key. And again, you have a generation of teachers, okay, from an era that technology was not around. You know, I still have a bag phone, like here it is. You know, some of you don't even know what I'm talking about. It's a bag phone with a phone, okay? So to be able to train teachers and to have them to embrace it, not just to teach it, to embrace it, to empower their students. I mean, that is my goal. I just want to share very quickly of a little technology. Since it's holiday, many of our toys are coming coded. This is Keisha. Keisha is an AI, look, and yeah, she might be a little Chucky-like, if you all know what I'm talking about, but Keisha teaches a language. In other words, she, as she's playing with my granddaughter, is actually teaching her how to speak French. And as my granddaughter learns words, Keisha gives her new words until they have a full conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, you talking about computational thinking, when your toys are able to teach you, then you know we are in a new type of world.
I just wanted to bring up something from the chat that I also had a question about that builds on this same thing that you three were just talking about, which is, okay, so you're talking about, you know, teaching and forming new CS teachers at times. What about formation of, since a lot of people are getting this computational thinking in other areas, how do we approach bringing this not just to CS? And some of the comments in the chat were even more strident, I would say, about, you know, breaking free from CS and just this idea that CS is controlling in ways that are not actually helpful to the field. So, I mean, and by the field, I mean computational thinking and moving from these old structures.
Well, I'll jump in.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be across discipline, because before you get to CS, you got to take other courses, even from elementary school. You have to remember, I'm a teacher from the rote memory school of thought, where you had to write on the chalkboard 100 times, I will not do whatever. And so that right there is where computational thinking has to change. We have to know that making a mistake, everyone, is a great thing if you learn from it. And when we look at testing, I'm surprised someone didn't throw out how we test children and students right now. We haven't changed. It's the same test bank. So how do we talk about computational thinking when we're grading our students the same traditional way?
Mm-hmm. Part of what I was sitting here thinking, Lynn, is in my head, I'm thinking, what do we mean by CS, right? So I think in some sense there's CS, and then when we started teaching coding, there's the confusion, is coding CS But when we think of making, I don't think we think of making as engineering, right? So it's okay to make, but it doesn't mean that if you're saying you're making something, you have to be, it has to be bound by, principles of engineering to the same, how you're teaching it. But I do think we're trying to, there's an interesting space for me to think of when we say CS, and we're trying to break away computational thinking. How are we defining what CS is? And how are we defining the relationship between computational thinking and that? And Yasmin, that goes all the way back to where you started with the article that was called, challenging us to think a little differently. And so for me, I think because sometimes we still haven't broken that bond between, yes, we can do some coding things and we can use coding as a medium to create in other areas without thinking that I have to make sure that your code is is making sure that you're going to be a great computer scientist. I think we haven't completely freed ourselves to apply computational thinking in some of the ways that you think about it.
And I just want to add one thing before we conclude. We're talking role modeling.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure all of you, and if you haven't, viewed the movie Hidden Figures.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone, yes, give me a nod, whatever. I didn't even know. Here I'm a Black female, and I didn't even know.
Yeah, I was upset. I actually was upset because I was like, growing up in Kansas, having no concept that there were, that there were all these women doing this. So I love the movie, but like you, Robbie, I was like, wow, why not? Why didn't we know that it was possible?
Right. I was in shock. But let me share something else, Nicole. Before COVID, and when I had to keynote, and someone said, and they didn't mean to say it, bless their heart, she's Black. I'm like, okay, because I'm talking technology. In other words, everyone, we got to promote diversity. That goes not only in schools, but role model and presenting our students with possibilities. That's what we're talking about, empowerment and possibilities. So other questions?
I think we have time for at least one more.
One thing I'd like to know is who's doing work, or how to sort of start getting your head around this idea of making computational thinking and making part of your core identity. Because I think that more than anything else here really struck a chord with me about where some of the gap lies. It's certainly what I see in my students.
I think, I would say that, that's at the core of the work that we do. I think, I get the interesting, I think a lot of folks are studying it, but I don't know how many folks are creating the systems to, to make that you have access from so I think I can think of a lot of people are studying it, but Yasmin, who's actually, who are doing, trying to create an everyday system so you have access to computational thinking? Maybe it's Fuse in some, I don't know if Reese worked with Fuse. Actually, some really interesting work is Mike Horn's work with Coded Beats. I don't know if the ear sketch work, but he's really trying to think about, instead of just doing the music camp, how do you think about learning to code your beats as being part of a team, a battle team, and that you're constantly have to iterate on your Python coding to create music in multiple different ways. And where that work is taking, expanding out into other ways than just computational would be really one to explore, because it is trying to develop a lifestyle around music that has computation embedded in it, and following it where it might take it.
Examples like, I think, Chris Wright from Drexel University, who's looking at algorithms in how hit lists are composed and hip hop. Because, algorithms, computational thinking is everywhere. There are people who look at dance. I mean, I think we have many more examples than just focused on STEM in history. Our socials, I mean, on how even in humanities, there's a whole big field. Cassie Davidson was running the digital humanities on how this, and this goes from, I mean, high school into the university. On the university level, research on how people are using algorithms and computational thinking to approach new problems. So I think there are many, many examples. Now, I think the question you were maybe asking, to what extent has this been translated into curriculum or actionable item? I think that is way much more dispersed yet. And many of the available CS curricula are really kind of coming first from the skills first perspective. And, you know, don't get me wrong, I think it's important, you know, we need to understand, but we can't ignore the critical component. It can't just be about first you learn how to code and then you can kind of start thinking critically about it. I think this has to kind of go hand in hand. Otherwise we'll never make a headway into helping people to connect what they learn and know, and why it is important to know, and what kind of critical questions and perspectives they can bring to bear.
And Noel, before we forget, I'm going to have to stand up just in case someone did download that app and did want to scan me. Okay, and I'm going to go off my virtual as you all wrap up. And the person who's able to actually make this happen, please put your email in the chat, okay? Because I'm going to send you a shirt. And I'm going to back it up, and I got light on so you can see. And if someone be the first to scan me and make it happen.
What's my proof? Because I did it. How do you know I did it?
Always about assessment.
I did do it. Yes, it's circulatory, skeletal, respiratory, digestive.
And keep tapping on it. Keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. And if I back up, you can pick more of my lungs, my heart. Yeah. So again, this is a great way to end. This is coding, but it's that curiosity. What if, everyone, I walked in with a t-shirt for this webinar and you could then scan me and learn about the systems of the heart and lungs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
I'm
you.
wondering whether it's going to work on the recording.
Sorry, Corey, go ahead.
No, I'm just hoping it works on the recording. So once I haven't had a chance to download during the session, but.
And by the way, that's my room with all of the technology. I have a room 20 by 20 of nothing but high tech, new tech, and things you would go, oh my.
So once again, thank you all for a wonderful session. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you especially to the audience for the questions and the great chat and the discussion. So have a wonderful holiday break and stay safe.